03:17 hours. February 2nd, 2026. Northeastern outskirts of Tehran. The night was silent in the way that makes security forces nervous. No traffic, no civilian movement, just the low hum of generators powering the floodlights surrounding a compound that officially didn't exist. Inside the perimeter fence, 3 layers deep, topped with razor wire and monitored by infrared cameras, sat one of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' most valuable assets. Not a nuclear facility, not a missile factory. Something more dangerous in the asymmetric warfare calculus, a drone production and command center responsible for manufacturing, testing, and deploying the Shahed 136 kamikaze drones that had been terrorizing coalition forces and allied nations for months. The compound sprawled across 12 hectares, assembly halls, electronics integration workshops, flight testing grounds, underground storage bunkers hardened against airstrikes, and most critically, the command center where IRGC officers coordinated drone strikes across Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the Red Sea shipping lanes. Tehran called it a research facility. Western intelligence called it Site Common 22. And for the past 6 months, it had been producing 200 Shahed drones per month. Cheap, expendable weapons that cost $20,000 each to build, but caused millions in damage when they hit oil infrastructure, military bases, or civilian targets. The attacks had been escalating. Last week, a swarm of 15 Shaheds struck a logistics base in Jordan, killing 3 U.S. service members. 4 days ago, another wave targeted shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, forcing commercial vessels to reroute and spiking insurance costs. Yesterday, intercepted communications confirmed Iran was preparing to transfer 500 drones to Russian forces for use in Ukraine. The world had been watching Iran's drone program grow for years, condemning it, sanctioning it, trying diplomatic pressure. None of it worked. So at 03:17 hours, someone decided diplomacy was over, and Tehran was about to discover that building drone factories near your capital comes with risks when your enemies have weapons you don't see coming. Because the strike that hit Site Common 22 didn't come from fighter jets. It didn't come from cruise missiles launched from ships offshore. It came from something Iran's air defense network never detected, until the first explosion lit up the night sky like a second sunrise. Rewind 96 hours. 4 days before the strike, satellite imagery analysts at a classified intelligence facility outside Washington flagged unusual activity at Site Common 22. Increased vehicle traffic, thermal signatures indicating 24-hour operations, and most concerning, extensive preparation of outdoor launch rails suggesting Iran was preparing a major drone deployment operation, possibly the largest single wave yet. The intelligence assessment was clear. Site Common 22 was ramping up for something significant, either a massive strike against coalition forces, a major transfer to proxy groups, or both. Diplomatic channels were explored. Back-channel warnings were sent through intermediaries. The message was simple: stand down the drone operations or face consequences. Iran's response came through actions, not words. Drone production increased, launch preparations continued, and intercepted communications suggested IRGC commanders were bragging that their drone factories were untouchable, too close to Tehran for Israel to strike without triggering regional war, too dispersed for U.S. forces to eliminate without a sustained air campaign that would violate Iranian sovereignty. They believed proximity to the capital was a shield. They were about to learn it was a target marker. The decision was made at the highest levels, not a full-scale military operation. Not an invasion. A surgical strike designed to send one message: your drone factories are not safe, your escalation has limits, and if you cross them, we will respond in ways you cannot defend against. The weapon of choice wasn't something Iran could shoot down, because it was already in Iranian airspace before anyone knew to look for it. February 1st, 18 o'clock hours. While Iranian air defense radars scanned the skies for fighter jets and cruise missiles, something much smaller and far more lethal was already loitering 60,000 feet above Tehran. An MQ-9 Reaper drone, operated remotely from a base thousands of miles away, had been orbiting Iranian airspace for 6 hours, invisible to ground-based radar due to altitude and radar cross-section optimization. But the Reaper wasn't carrying its standard Hellfire missiles. Those were too small for the target. Instead, it carried 2 Jibu-39 small-diameter bombs, precision-guided weapons with 250-pound warheads and GPS accuracy measured in single-digit meters. Small enough to minimize collateral damage, precise enough to hit specific buildings inside a sprawling compound, powerful enough to collapse reinforced structures. The Reaper's sensors, high-definition cameras and infrared targeting systems had been mapping Site Command 22 for hours, identifying key structures, confirming personnel patterns, waiting for the optimal strike window when maximum damage could be achieved with minimal risk to civilians in surrounding neighborhoods. At 22:30 hours, satellite imagery confirmed the target set. The main assembly hall, where drone airframes were constructed, the electronics integration facility, where guidance systems were installed, and the underground command bunker, where strike operations were coordinated. 3 buildings, 2 bombs, carefully calculated impact points designed to collapse structures inward rather than creating explosive radius that would endanger nearby residential areas. The strike authorization came through encrypted channels at 23:45 hours. Launch window 03:15 to 03:20 hours, when Site Command 22 would have minimal personnel due to shift change and when atmospheric conditions favored precision targeting. The mission was clear: destroy Iran's most productive drone facility without triggering the regional war that Iran believed would protect it. 03:15 hours. The Reaper's weapons bay opened silently at 60,000 feet. Pneumatic release mechanisms pushed the first Jibu-39 free. The weapon's wings deployed automatically, allowing it to glide toward the target from altitude. No rocket motor, no infrared signature, just a falling object following GPS coordinates with mathematical precision. 45 seconds later, the second bomb released, following a parallel trajectory toward a separate aim point. Both weapons fell in total silence. No warning, no radar detection, just 2 250-pound warheads dropping through the darkness toward a facility whose defenders had no idea they were under attack. Iranian air defense systems saw nothing. The bombs were too small, too high, too stealthy. Ground-based radar designed to detect aircraft missed the tiny radar returns. Infrared sensors looking for engine heat found nothing. The country's multi-billion-dollar air defense network, built to stop fighter jets and cruise missiles, was blind to the real threat falling from directly overhead. 03:17 hours. Impact. The first Jibu-39 struck the main assembly hall's roof, penetrating 3 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating inside the structure. The explosion was shaped by the building itself, pressure waves contained by walls, force directed downward into the production floor where dozens of partially assembled Shahed drones sat on assembly jigs. The blast wave shredded airframes, shattered electronics, ignited fuel tanks stored for testing. Within seconds, secondary explosions rippled through the building as volatile materials cooked off. The structure didn't collapse outward in a dramatic fireball. It imploded, walls buckling inward, roof sections pancaking down onto the production floor, turning $50 million worth of drones and equipment into compressed rubble. The second bomb hit 18 seconds later, striking the electronics integration facility with equal precision. This building housed the sophisticated components, imported circuit boards, guidance computers, communication systems that made Shahed's effective weapons rather than crude flying bombs. The explosion gutted the facility, destroying clean rooms where delicate assembly occurred and incinerating inventory that represented months of sanctions evading procurement. The command bunker, buried underground and hardened against direct strikes, survived the initial attack, but the bunker's ventilation shafts, power conduits, and communications infrastructure all ran through the buildings above. When those structures collapsed, They severed the bunker's lifelines. Backup generators provided emergency power, but external communications were cut. The command center was intact but isolated, a hardened tomb with no way to coordinate the drone operations it was built to manage. 0319 hours. Iranian emergency response forces were still trying to understand what happened. No air raid sirens had sounded. No fighter jets had been detected. No cruise missiles were tracked inbound. Yet 2 buildings at a critical military facility were burning, and initial reports suggested catastrophic damage. Security camera footage was reviewed frantically. Infrared recordings showed the moment of impact, brief flashes, then massive fireballs as secondary explosions consumed both structures. But the footage showed no incoming missiles, no aircraft, no obvious source of attack. It was as if the explosions had materialized from nowhere. The conclusion was initially disbelieved: aerial bombardment from an altitude and approach vector that had evaded every defensive system. The implications were terrifying. If Site Common 22 could be struck without warning in the suburbs of Tehran, then no facility in Iran was safe. Not the nuclear installations at Natanz, not the missile factories at Isfahan, not the command bunkers beneath Tehran itself. 0345 hours. The fires at Site Common 22 burned uncontrolled. Iranian firefighters arrived but found access roads blocked by collapsed structures. The heat was so intense that approaching the buildings was impossible. All they could do was establish perimeters and let the fires consume everything inside. Casualty reports came in slowly. Because the strike had occurred during a shift change, fewer personnel were inside the buildings than during peak production hours. Initial estimates suggested 12 killed, 30 injured, tragic losses, but far fewer than would have died if the bombs had hit 2 hours earlier when hundreds of workers were on site. This wasn't accident. The strike was calibrated for maximum infrastructure damage with minimum human casualties. The message wasn't "we want to kill Iranians." The message was, "We can destroy what you build whenever we choose, and you cannot stop us." 0430 hours. Iranian state media reported an industrial accident at a defense facility near Tehran. No mention of airstrikes. No acknowledgement of military targeting. No admission that the country's air defenses had failed to detect incoming weapons. The official narrative was necessary for regime survival. Admitting that Tehran itself was vulnerable to precision strikes would undermine the government's ability to project strength. Admitting that Site Common 22 had been destroyed would expose the drone program's vulnerability. Admitting that air defenses failed would invite further attacks from enemies now emboldened by demonstrated capability. So Iran called it an accident and pretended the most significant strike on their capital's outskirts in decades never happened. But inside the IRGC command structure, there was no pretending. Site Common 22 was gone, production capacity was eliminated, months of work erased, and most critically, the psychological advantage Iran believed it held, the ability to strike coalition forces with impunity using cheap drones, had been shattered by a demonstration that precision strikes could reach anywhere, anytime, from systems Iran couldn't see or stop. 0600 hours. Damage assessment teams entered the smoldering ruins. What they found confirmed the worst. The assembly hall was beyond repair, structural integrity compromised, equipment destroyed, production impossible for at least 18 months even if rebuilding began immediately. The electronics facility was similarly devastated. Specialized equipment that took years to acquire through sanctions evasion was melted slag. The financial cost was estimated at $400 million in infrastructure and equipment. The operational cost was worse: 200 drones per month production eliminated, forcing Iran to rely on smaller, less capable facilities scattered across the country. The strategic cost was incalculable. Enemies now knew that Iran's drone factories could be targeted and destroyed without triggering the regional war Tehran believed would deter such strikes. 08 Duro hours. The strike that official channels denied had happened became the worst-kept secret in Tehran. Residents reported hearing explosions. Social media posts showed fire glows in the pre-dawn darkness. Foreign intelligence agencies confirmed strikes had occurred through satellite imagery showing thermal signatures and structural damage. Iran could deny it publicly. But privately, every military commander understood what had happened. And more importantly, they understood what it meant. The drone escalation that IRGC leadership believed was a cost-free way to pressure adversaries had just proven to carry costs Iran couldn't afford. The Shahed program would continue. Other facilities existed. Production would resume at reduced capacity. But the calculation had changed. Every drone factory was now a potential target. Every escalation invited retaliation that Iran's defenses couldn't prevent. Tehran was under fire not because it was at war. Tehran was under fire because it had crossed the line from harassment to systematic threat. And the response was surgical, precise, and undeniable. So here's the question the world is asking. Did this strike deter Iran's drone program, or did it just force them to hide production better and retaliate harder? Does precision targeting reduce conflict by raising costs of aggression, or does it accelerate spirals where each side feels compelled to strike first? Drop your analysis. And if you want more on the shadow war most media won't cover, subscribe, because the next story involves cyber weapons that destroyed infrastructure without anyone understanding how it happened.